Hello and welcome back to Neo Psychology with me, your teacher, Mr. Neo, the channel where I teach online psychology lessons for my wonderful students. Let's get started, shall we? So today's lesson, we're carrying on with the topic of research methods. This seems to be dragging on, doesn't it? But it's the most important module. And today we're looking at lesson 24, types of data. Let's find out about types of data, shall we? Let's start with the starter. What better place to start? There we go. Starter. I wanted to conduct a piece of research to understand students' attitudes towards psychology. What would be the best way to go about that? How could I go about collecting data? Yeah, so how would I go about trying to find out that piece of information, right? We're going to conduct an experiment we could do, yeah? And then we think about what are the types of data that we might get. Let's have a look what we're going to do today. So, we've got 4 learning objectives. Learning objective 1. Show comprehension and apply knowledge of qualitative and quantitative data. Evaluate, so discuss and evaluate qualitative and quantitative data. And then we're also going to look at primary and secondary data and then how to discuss and evaluate that as well. Let's get started on LO1, shall we? Show comprehension and apply knowledge of qualitative and quantitative data. When an investigation is conducted, data is collected. This is words, numbers, images, sounds without text, etc. So lots of different things can be data. Once context or meaning is added, then data becomes information. Data analysis is the process of turning data into information. So we've got qualitative and quantitative data. We have touched upon these 2 types of data before, but now we're going to look at them in a little bit more detail. Qualitative data. Qualitative data is expressed in words rather than numbers or statistics, and may take the form of a written description of the thoughts, feelings, and opinions of participants, or a written account of what the researcher saw in the case of an observation. So an observation is if I was to be writing down everything that I saw or everything that was said. Thus, a transcript from an interview, an extract from a diary, or notes recorded within a counseling session would be classed as qualitative data. You with me so far? Good. Qualitative data. Qualitative methods of data collection are those that are concerned with the interpretation of language from an example, for example, an interview or an unstructured observation. An unstructured observation is where I'm literally writing down every single thing that's going on, every single piece of information, everything that everyone says, okay? It usually works best if there's only like 1 or 2 people, or if it was like a therapy session with 1 or a couple or something like that. That's when unstructured observations are most useful. Whereas if you have an unstructured observation of like a room full of people, it's not really very easy to collate all of that data all together. An interview is another example where you get qualitative data, right? You talk with someone, you talk with them, how are you doing? You're doing well, tell me about this, tell me about that, and then you write the answers down. That gives you lots of words. That's qualitative data. Now I'm going to look at quantitative data. Quantitative data, this is data that is expressed numerically, so in numbers. Quantitative data collection techniques usually gather numerical data in the form of individual scores from participants, such as the number of words a person was able to recall in a memory experiment. Okay, it gives you a number essentially. Okay, it's numerical. Data is open to being analyzed statistically and can be easily converted into graphs, charts, etc. Of course, if the data is quantitative and it's in numbers, it's quite easy to analyze that data. It's quite easy to put it into a graph or a chart. Whereas if I was to get qualitative data from like an interview, how would I put that information in a graph or a chart? It's not as easy to convert, is it? Which one is best though? Neither really. It depends upon the purpose and aims of the research. Also, there is significant overlap between the 2. So researchers collecting quantitative data as part of an experiment may often interview participants as a way of gaining more qualitative insight in their experience of the investigation. Similarly, there are a number of ways in which qualitative information can be converted to numerical data. So one is not better than the other, it's just maybe one type of data might be more suited to the type of research that you're doing, or the way in which you want to interpret it. I personally prefer quantitative data because I think it's quite nice to do like a questionnaire with multiple choice answers, and then you can give them out to lots of people, and it's quite an easy way of collecting large sums of data, and then it's quite easy to analyze that data and put it into a graph or a statistical test. Whereas qualitative data is good. We're going to have a look at the strengths and weaknesses, but it's good typically because you get more in-depth analysis. So for example, case studies where you do a research study on one specific person, you usually go into lots of detail of that one person, lots of interviews, and you find out lots of different things, whereas quantitative data usually means you get more people. One quick way you can remember this is quantitative data has got the N in it for numbers, and qualitative data has got the L in it for language, or the word lit in it for like literature, for words, okay? So quantitative data is with numbers, so I've got a picture of Pythagoras, who's like a mathematician, and I've got qualitative data, which is about language, and I've got old Willie Shakespeare. Okay, let's get the definitions down, shall we? Qualitative and quantitative data. Still got Willie on the mind. Qualitative data, data that is expressed in what and non-numerical. Data that is expressed in words, exactly, and non-numerical. Quantitative data is data that can be counted, and usually given as, go on. Exactly, numbers, well done. Did you not say it? Say it. Here we go. Right. Question 1 to 8. Let's have a look. Is it qualitative data or is it quantitative data, right? I put a little L for qualitative because it's got the L, and N for quantitative because it's got an N in it. Right. Let's do it together, shall we? Actually, I reckon it'd be better. Pause the video. 8 answers. L's and N's. Pick the L or the N, and I'm going to go through it now. Pause it though, so do it on your own. Don't wait for me to do it. Lazy. Okay. Number 1, students rate their enjoyment of research methods on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, think about what's the type of data. The type of data is going to be on a scale of 1 to 10, so it's going to be numbers, so it's most likely to be quantitative data, N. Good. Number 2, a recovering patient describes his experience of schizophrenia. That's most likely to be in qualitative data. He's more likely to talk in words, as we all do. Number 3, a researcher asks passers-by their views on litter in the town centre using a series of yes and no questions. Because it's yes and no, it's giving you an option. I know they're not necessarily words, I know they're not necessarily numbers, but it's quantitative data because it's in sort of categories, so it's a yes or no, so it's a closed question. Closed questions, as we looked at, typically gives you quantitative data. 4, a student gives feedback on their teacher using a questionnaire made up of open questions. Here we go, open questions. Now, open questions is most likely to be qualitative data. Number 5, a researcher categorizes the social behaviors of children into one of 3 categories. Again, it's not necessarily going to be in numbers, but it isn't going to be in categories, so that's more likely to be quantitative. Oh, qualitative. A researcher categorized the social behavior into 3. That one's up for debate, I think. I think it could have easily been quantitative, but I think as it's words as well, it could also be qualitative. So either way, you get a pass on that one. Number 6. Students record the number of hours they spend revising and the number of hours they spent on social network sites. Number of hours, that's definitely going to be quantitative data. Number 7, a teacher interviews Year 10 students about their ideas of what psychology is. That's most likely going to be in words, it's not going to be in categories, so that's most likely to be qualitative data. And then finally, a girl writes a diary describing what daily life is like for a child. Again, that sounds like qualitative data. Lovely, there we go. I think number 5 is more quantitative, but there we go. And that's qualitative and quantitative data. Easy, right? Qualitative, words, quantitative, numbers. Identify one thing you learned about qualitative and quantitative data. Why do you think learning about these two types of data is important, and how does it apply in real life, right? Think about the types of things that happen in real life when, if you get asked a questionnaire, if you get asked and stopped in the street, excuse me, could you give some time for cancer research? Yeah, sure, go on then. All right, and they ask the type of questions. What type of questions are they? Are they qualitative? Are they quantitative? Maybe it's a mixture. And what questions are you still wondering about? If you've got any questions you're not sure, let me know, right? Send me an email. You got my email, or put it in the comment section. And there we go. That's learning objective 1 complete. I'm ticking it off. We're moving on to learning objective 2 now. Let's evaluate qualitative and quantitative data. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses of each one? Let's have a wee look, shall we? Evaluation. Qualitative data. So that's the words. Qualitative data offers the researcher much more richness of detail than quantitative data, okay? Detail, richness of detail, more in-depth, okay? Qualitative has got a lot more details and a lot more in-depth, which could be an important insight. It is much broader in scope and gives the participant/respondent more license to develop their thoughts, feelings, and opinions on a given subject. Of course, if it's a closed question, you go, rate your feelings on a scale of 1 to 10. Well, I guess I'm about a 4 right now, right? It's not very detailed. If you went, tell me about how you're feeling right now. Oh, actually, I've been really depressed lately. Don't know why I got straight to depression. No, I've been really happy. I've been really good, enjoying the Christmas at home on my own. No. For this reason, qualitative data tends to have greater external validity than quantitative data. It provides the researcher with a more meaningful insight into the participant's worldview. Yes, you're getting more insight into their view, aren't you, right? Better detail. But what are the weaknesses, though? That said, qualitative data is often difficult to analyze. It tends not to lend itself to being summarized statistically, so that patterns and comparisons within and between data may be hard to identify. So it's difficult to analyze, okay? If I was to have an interview with someone, it's quite difficult to sort of compare that interview with somebody else's, especially if I had open questions where I went in all different directions and I didn't stick to certain topics. As a consequence, conclusions often rely on the subjective interpretations of the researcher, and these may be subject to bias, particularly if the researcher has preconceptions about what he or she is expecting to find. So again, yeah, it's subject to bias, okay? If I wanted to find how my medication makes people feel better, if I was to have quantitative data, I would say, rate your mood on a scale of 1 to 10, and it'll be quite good. And I go, right, before they had an average of 7.2, and afterwards they had an average of 9.6. I go, there was a clear increase in mood. However, if I had qualitative data, I was like, tell me about your mood. Yeah, it was all right. And you go, oh, they said they were all right. Oh, yeah, they are like, oh, how are you feeling today? I'm fine. Oh, fine. He felt fine. That's really positive, clear improvements, right? It's subject to bias. I might interpret somebody's words in different ways because it's qualitative. But there's also strengths and weaknesses of quantitative data. Essentially, the criticisms of quantitative data are the opposite of qualitative. Quantitative data is relatively simple to analyze, easy to analyze. Therefore, comparisons between groups can be easily drawn. It's easy to analyze. It's numbers. I can compare one group with the other really, really easily. Also, data in numerical form tends to be more objective and less open to bias. Yeah, they've given me their number. I can't change that. I can't interpret it in a different way, can I? On the other hand, quantitative data is much more narrower in scope and meaning than qualitative data. It thus may fail to represent real life. Yeah, it might not be very realistic because we don't really talk in numbers, do we? So it's a bit narrower in the sense that it doesn't give you as much detail. Okay, I got some questions for us to do. Again, qualitative data or quantitative data? Will these types of ways of finding data be more qualitative or quantitative? Pause the video and give it a go. and we'll have a look at the answers right about now. Okay, number 1. An experiment. Is that more likely to give you qualitative or quantitative data? Quantitative data. It's up for debate, I reckon, but more quantitative. 2. A questionnaire with closed questions. Qualitative or quantitative? Yeah, closed questions are more likely to give you quantitative data. A questionnaire of open questions. Therefore, open questions meaning like, tell me about your day. Open question, easy. Closed question, how was your day? Good, very good, not so good. Okay, closed questions give you options. Open questions leave it open to you. You can give you any answer. So open questions are more likely to give you qualitative data. Good. An interview is more likely to give you qualitative data. A correlation is more likely to give you quantitative data. Now we've got structured and unstructured observations. So unstructured observation is when you just record everything that's going on and everything that everyone says. An unstructured, a structured observation is when you have categories. You have categories. Okay, I'm observing this baby. Every time it smiles, I'm going to tick it into this category. Every time it frowns, I tick into that category. And that's a structured observation. So there's usually categories involved. So a structured observation is more likely to be quantitative data, whereas unstructured is more likely to be qualitative data. Well done. Did you get them right? All of them? Knew you would. Such a great teacher. There we go. And that's the evaluation of qualitative and quantitative data. Identify one thing you learned. Why do you think it's important? How does it apply in real life? And again, if you have any questions, let me know. And there we go. We're done with qualitative and quantitative data. I'm ticking it off and we're moving on to learning objective 3. Show comprehension and apply knowledge of primary and secondary data. We haven't learned about primary secondary data yet, but by the end of this lesson, you will know about it. Here we go. Primary data. Primary data, sometimes called field research, refers to original data that has been collected specifically for the purpose of the investigation by the researcher. It is data that arrives first-hand from the participants themselves. Data which is gathered by conducting an experiment, questionnaire, interview, or observation would be classed as primary data. Okay, so for example, when I sent you lot out to go and do some research with your seeing if they were obeying commands, whether you were wearing a mask or not, that's your primary data. You've come up with that data. You've created it. You got the data and you did it yourself. That's primary data. Secondary data is data that has been collected by someone other than the person who is conducting the research. In other words, this is data that already exists before the psychologist begins their research or investigation. Data such as this is sometimes referred to as desk research, and it is often the case that secondary data has already been subject to statistical testing and therefore the significance is known. Secondary data includes data that may be located in journal articles, books or websites, statistical information held by the government, such as that obtained in the census, population records or employee absence records within an organization are all examples of secondary data. So it's research that you personally haven't conducted, okay? It's research that has already been published somewhere already. So for example, if I wanted to find out about depression, for example, I might then get 10 different pieces of research or experiments that have included depression, and I might collate all of those together and make an analysis of all of their participants all together, right? And that would be an example of me using secondary data. Primary data was me, right, I want to find out about depression and I go out and do a piece of research to find out about it. That would be primary data. Right, have a look at these 7 questions. Are they primary or secondary data? Okay, have a little look, pause the video, answer the questions, write down the answers. How many are you going to get right out of 7? Let's have a look. Right, a researcher searches through newspapers to see if a relationship between daily temperature and the total number of violent incidences. Okay, I'm not doing the research, am I? I'm looking in the papers where the research is taking place. So it's not primary data, it's secondary data. Number 2, an interview with people with obsessive compulsive disorder about their experiences. Okay, I'm interviewing them about their experiences, so this is likely to be primary data. An observation of how primary school children negotiate rules during a game of marbles. Okay, I'm observing that behavior, therefore it's primary data. I'm not getting it from anywhere else. Number 4, a comparison of crime statistics in inner cities and rural areas to see if there is a difference. Did I conduct the statistics myself? No, therefore it's secondary data. Number 5, a researcher assesses how the GCSE results of schools in her local area compare with national averages. That's secondary data, okay? I'm using somebody else's data. If it was primary data, I would then make people sit down and do some tests or GCSE results and then compare it, okay? But I'm not, I'm using their data, so that's secondary data. 6, a lab study to see if males or females are more susceptible to visual illusions. Well, that's primary data. And the final one, number 7, a researcher examines the transcript of a trial to see if there were inconsistencies in eyewitness accounts. Is it my research? No, so I think that's secondary. Good. And that's primary and secondary data. Identify one thing you learned about primary and secondary data. Why do you think learning about primary and secondary data is important? And how does this apply in real life? Where in the world do we see primary or secondary data? In the news, you had Boris Johnson talk about COVID and he put all his graphs up on TV. He's using the statistics of the hospitals, therefore I would argue that's secondary data. What questions has primary and secondary data raised for you? What are you still wondering about? You got any questions? Let me know. Or ask one of the other smart students in your class. There we go. I'm ticking it off whether you're happy with me or not. And we're moving on to evaluating. What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? What are the strengths and weaknesses of primary and secondary data? Primary and secondary data. The main strength of primary data is that it fits the job. Okay, primary data is authentic data obtained from the participants themselves for the purpose of a particular investigation. Okay, if I wanted to find out something quite specific or quite niche, for example, my dissertation was on an investigation into the aesthetic appreciation of symmetry in children with and without dyslexia. I wanted to see if children with or without dyslexia preferred symmetrical or asymmetrical images. There's no data that there's no research gone into that published anywhere that I could find. So if I wanted to find this out, I had to create my own research for it. So it was primary data that I created, and therefore it fits the job. It fits what I'm looking for. Questionnaires and interviews, for instance, can be designed in such a way that they specifically target information that the researcher acquires. You can make the research and make it specific to exactly what you want to find out about. Therefore, that's primary data, and that's one of the strengths. However, of course, to produce primary data requires time and effort on the part of the researcher. It's quite a big process to go and do some research. It's a long thing to do. If you want to find it out, that takes time, it takes a lot of effort. Conducting an experiment, for instance, requires considerable planning, preparation, and resources, and this is a limitation when compared with secondary data, which may be accessed within a matter of minutes. Secondary data. In contrast to primary data, secondary data may be inexpensive and easily accessed, requiring minimal effort. If I wanted to find out about something, like obesity rates, for example, I type into Google Scholar or any other search engine with academic journals, and I can find out loads of research about it, loads of things that people have done. I can collate them all together and find out about it, include information that I like and exclude bits that I don't like, and I've got loads of it. It's inexpensive, it's easy to do, it's usually free to access all this information, and it's easily done. I don't have to conduct my own research, go to so much effort. When examining secondary data, the researcher may find that the desired information already exists, so there's no need to conduct primary data collection. Yeah, if the research is already done, why reinvent the wheel? You can just use their data and analyze it further. The flip side is that there may be substantial variation in the quality and accuracy of secondary data. Information might at first appear to be valuable and promising, but on further investigation may be outdated or incomplete, right? You might find a piece of research, oh, this looks really good, and you have a look and go, actually, it's not really accurate, or I don't like the way they did the research, therefore it doesn't really fit what I want to do. The content of the data may not quite match the researcher's needs or objectives, so the old adage, if you want something doing well, do it yourself, could often apply. Right, primary and secondary data. Get the definitions down. Primary data is information that has been obtained firsthand by the researcher for the purpose of a research project. Secondary data, you do it this time. Secondary data, information that has already, been collected by someone else and so predates the current research project. There we go. And that's the definitions of primary and secondary data. Easy. Identify one thing you learned about primary and secondary data. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? Write down one strength and one weakness for each primary and secondary data. You shan't need more than that. Why do you think learning about primary and secondary data is important? How does it apply in real life? And what questions? You got any questions still? Let me know. And there we go. That's the last learning objective. Learning objective 4 sorted. Plenary. What have I got for the plenary? Multiple choice questions. Let's give these a go. Number 1. Which would be classed as quantitative data? A, an extract from a diary. B, a transcript from an interview. C, notes from a counselling session. Or D, scores in an IQ test. I think this is more likely to be D. Yes, scores on an IQ test is going to give you a number, right? Your IQ is like 130 or whatever, 100 is the average. That's going to give you a number, and you can easily analyze that. You can make means and averages and modes and whatever, and can compare them quite easily. Number 2, which is not a strength of primary data? Which is not a strength? So 3 of these will be strengths, 1 will not be a strength. A, it requires less time and effort than secondary data. B, it can be designed to target the information that the researcher needs. C, it tends to have higher validity than secondary data. And D, it is acquired firsthand from the participants themselves. It's A, of course, right? It doesn't require less time. Secondary data requires less time and effort. So therefore, A is not a strength. Number 3, which is most likely to produce qualitative data? A, an experiment. B, a structured observation. C, a questionnaire made up of closed questions. Or D, an interview. Answer it. Tell me, A, B, C, or D. Say it out loud. I don't care if you're on your own. Did you say an interview? Smarty pants. Yes. D, an interview. Only 3 multiple choice questions. There you go. How many did you get? 3, 2, 1. Are you an absolute legend? And there we go. That's today's lesson. Thank you for joining the lesson. Today was lesson 24, types of data. Next lesson is lesson 25, descriptive statistics. Be sure to submit your notes for this lesson. Well done, my neo-psychologist. Great job today. Keep up the brilliant work. I've been Mr. Neo. God bless and peace.
I'm feeling like Will. I feel like a prince. I'm feeling myself. I'm loaded with bills, cause I wasn't blessed with no Uncle Phil. Don't know how it feels. I wanted to flex, they told me to chill. I'm making a flip. My life is a flick, now load up the film.